So, it has also been a year of grief and loss on multiple levels. Where are we now? Have we grown and become better? Or are we emotionally and spiritually at sea? Let's discuss this now with clinical psychologist Bradley Daniels. Bradley, always lovely to chat to you. How are we doing emotionally and spiritually 1 year on?
Sally, I think, 1 year seems like a very short space of time, but we all know that it's actually felt like quite a long year. And if I think about just exactly to the day when we started our first sort of lockdown, a lot of people were then thinking, oh, this is going to be for the 21 days, and then it's all going to be over. Then we can go back to normal life, as we kept calling it. And here we are a full year on, and so much has happened in between. We've had a lot of grief, as you say, in terms of people having lost lives, having lost livelihoods, but also just having lost a way of life. So in other words, who would have thought on the 26th of March that we would be wearing masks wherever we go, that we'd be seeing people behind masks. And, that already is a change from what we had deemed to be normal life or the life we were used to. And whenever there's a change of that nature, we can also feel a sense of grief or of the loss of that sort of state of life as we knew it once before. So that's just the beginning. But then also we add on to that the economic loss that happened over this period of time. A lot of people have lost their jobs, have had to work fewer hours, have lost income. But then most significantly, a lot of people have lost their lives. A lot of people have lost loved ones. But also some people who, for example, may have survived COVID may find themselves with longer sort of functional impairments, such as those people that may be suffering or still dealing to date with long COVID. So all of that is tantamount to a sense of loss, which leads to grief. And the thing with this grief can really show up in our physical bodies as well as our psychological bodies. But often when we experience grief, we can have the sense of having a lack of energy or no energy, sort of being sad, feeling, almost having symptoms of feeling depressed. And so I'm very hesitant to kind of use the clinical term depression, for fear of, everyone sort of jumps to the conclusion that now I must be depressed. Whereas actually we may have some symptoms of depression, which looks a lot like depression, but actually is as a result of the grief and the loss and the grieving process.
So where are we now, 1 year in? Have we sort of adopted almost like a war mentality of like, we're in this for the long haul, we're just going to carry on? Or are we all suffering a sort of national ongoing traumatic stress disorder? Because there's grief at the loss of livelihoods, there's grief at the loss of the way things were, but there's also actual grief with friends and family dying.
Yes, absolutely. So if it's going to be that war mentality we're talking about, probably in the beginning, we definitely felt like soldiers going to the battleground ready for war. And right now, I would describe us a bit like fatigued soldiers, where the war has just gone on for too long and we're finding ourselves almost battle weary at this particular stage. And then I'd also just be very careful around using the clinical term again, PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, because post-traumatic stress disorder is a very specific type of clinical disorder. And not everyone that experiences a trauma necessarily develops PTSD. So what we can say safely is that we all are experiencing various or different kinds of traumas at this particular point in time. But I would be very hesitant to say that collectively we are all sort of exhibiting features of PTSD, which would mean that, for example, our functioning would be completely, significantly sort of eroded or eradicated fundamentally. Whereas if we say that we all are dealing with different types of trauma, then we can also put the right measures in place to be able to, as you say, to be able to get on with life in some way or the other.
Yeah. I have to ask you for your assessment on the whole. Do you think, we've seen extraordinary acts of kindness, we're just chatting to the Solidarity Fund, and ordinary South Africans, from ordinary South Africans to big business, incredible acts of generosity on the one hand. On the other, we've seen corruption, stealing the very things that could keep people alive. Are we becoming a kinder, more caring nation, or have we actually reverted to anger and distance? We're also seeing a lot of conflict in our public space, a lot of anger, a lot of polarization. Where are we?
So the way I like to look at that, so let's start with the first premise, that COVID-19 is something which fundamentally has added a new stress and a very significant stress to all our lives. And this is, for the first time in history, this is everyone. So this includes psychologists as well as their patients or their clients. We all are going through the same thing. So it's not even a situation whereby what the person sitting on the other side of the couch is experiencing is quite different to what I'm experiencing. And so there's that distance. So everyone is experiencing everything almost under a magnifying glass. So in other words, if you were angry with any particular person or particular relationship that you were in, chances are with COVID-19 that anger seemed to have gotten almost like more exacerbated and more fiery, if you want. The same as we've seen with comorbidities or predisposed illnesses that we may have. With COVID-19, the stress associated with it has made everything a little bit more highlighted. Similarly to in society, a lot of the challenges that we saw, for example, around sort of the care of children, when schools were closed for the first time. We saw the number of children that were left destitute and not even having a meal for the day because they relied on that specific sort of feeding program. But what COVID-19 did is it put a lot of things under the spotlight, such as gender-based violence as well. It has always been there. But because of COVID-19 and everything being almost highlighted, everything seems to be far greater and a lot more pronounced than what it actually was. But actually, it's actually not changed at all. It's actually just fundamentally more highlighted. Yeah. But also on another note, there's been enormous acts of kindness, as I heard in your previous story, acts of kindness that we have seen from civil society, from businesses, and sometimes just from the person next to you in the store or in the grocery store who says, listen, I have a little extra. I can actually, support somebody else to have something extra. The amount of...
That certainly does... That does warm the heart. Bradley, I have to jump in with one very quick question. We've got another year of this. The vaccines are not coming anytime soon. What is your top tip for someone who's feeling overwhelmed, battle-weary, to get through this next year?
So the first thing that has been highlighted for us, and it's a top tip, is that we need to step up our self-care. So what COVID-19 brought to us is that our wellness and our health is crucial and key to our well-being, and particularly also our mental health. And I think it's the first time that we are seeing such a spotlight on mental health as we have during the various lockdowns across the world, not just in South Africa. And so I think that the tip is to take care of yourself, take care of yourself. So self-care begins with taking care of yourself. And we can only take care of others if we have nourished and taken care of ourselves. The second thing is reach out for support if there's a need or if you are struggling. So this is where seeking professional help is now making more and more sense to so many people. A lot of South Africans are now reaching out for the first time and saying, hey, listen, I think I'd like to see how therapy can support me at this particular point in time. And then another tool, which I think anyone can access at any time, is I find that the practice of mindfulness is very useful at this point in time to help us to deal with a life that seems to almost be out of our control. Yeah. We go from one wave to the other wave, then the borders are closed, then they're not, then the lockdown is changed. So it's almost the sense of losing a sense of control is what a lot of us are experiencing at this particular point in time. And mindfulness is a tool, which is just the practice of staying in the here and now, without judgment, right? So staying in the practice of staying in the here and now without judgment.
So important.
And that particular
so it's
has helped many people to be able to just make sense of things.
Bradley, such wonderful tips. Self-care, mindfulness, and let go of the stuff you cannot control and just look after yourself and those around you. Thank you so much, clinical psychologist Bradley Daniels. Let's focus on the Western Cape. Of course, one of the worst affected provinces. The region was the epicenter of the first wave. eNCA's Ronald Masinda looks at those who reached out to help others despite their difficulties.